Thank you, Senator Franken, and I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for holding this hearing. It's a very important issue, and for all of you being here today. Obviously, high gas prices on the West Coast and supply and demand issues is something I've spent a lot of time on, my office has spent a lot of time on. And here we are again with prices approaching $4 per gallon in Washington State. And it is starting to, when it gets to that point, it starts to eat into our economic growth. So up 9 cents in the past week. Washington State prices are among some of the highest in the nation, 27 cents above the national average. And a new report by McCullough Research confirms that something we suspected all along, that during the past year, West Coast gasoline prices have ceased to follow the crude oil price. I mean, I think my constituents would get it if there was a supply and demand formula that they could follow here, but they can't follow one. So I'd like to enter into the record the report to illustrate some of the peculiar behaviors on the West Coast petroleum markets over the last year. The report also underscores the need for continued real oversight and investigation of refinery shutdown announcements. We found last year that in a West Coast refinery fire that everybody said, oh, well, this is the cause of the spike, when in reality, data showed that refineries weren't offline, but actually were still emitting, which raised a lot of questions about who is actually following these markets and the transparency. I believe that EIA should play an even bigger role. But what we need to know now is what's caused these recent spikes. On October 1st, a seemingly minor problem at ExxonMobil's Torrance refinery led to an almost instantaneous increase in wholesale prices in California, adding up 50 cents in less than a week. A power problem that only briefly interrupted operations is supposedly blamed for one of the highest price spikes in a decade. Now, I guarantee you, when the implosion happened in the Gulf, if prices would have spiked that much, the nation would have taken action. And so my question is, when these prices spiked to this level, in both cases, crude oil prices were either level or falling, and during the highest price spike, inventories were either increasing or remaining at a historic 5-year averages. So we're not following supply and demand here. My constituents very much want to see more transparency there. Mr. Plausen, in your testimony, you mentioned the high degree of volatility due to refineries, and Mrs. Gilligan, you cited reasons. But just as these shutdowns seems to be hitting the press, what do you think we need to do to get more transparency in the market?
We supported Senator Dorgan's amendment in 2007 to try to get EIA more involved in communicating about refinery scheduled maintenance and outages. You know, it's the unplanned outages that really tear up the market. I think in the upper Midwest, there were 2 or 3 refineries that were down for maintenance, and generally that was understood. But then all of a sudden, you had, I think, a serious problem in a BP refinery in Whiting, and then you had another refinery outage, and all of a sudden you had a catastrophe on your hands. We think we need to take baby steps to see what can be done to improve communication and planning, so that people are more aware of what potential problems could be. So we're ready to sit down and talk with you and committee staff about what kind of things EIA might be able to do to help everyone accommodate those changes, the outages that are scheduled.
I mean, do you think that the country would have stood for, if we had the Gulf implosion and everybody being shut down, 10 other refineries in the United States saying, oh, I had planned maintenance, so I'm going to go down? Do you think we would have put up with that?
Well, I think to some extent, and certainly Valero knows more about that than I do, but there's a life safety issue without they have to go down for maintenance, or they could risk injury to their employees if they don't do the right. And so you have to weigh that into it. It's not that simple, and it can be very complicated.
4 or 5 refineries going down at the same time.
Well,
First off, Valero announces its turnarounds, planned turnarounds. We announce them actually for the financial community because they're very interested in them. There are also services that actually aggregate them and put them together. But I think your question was addressing more of how you have a spot situation and all of a sudden the markets move dramatically. And it's actually the expectation. Supply and demand is there, but it's the expectation. So when Torrance, in your example, had an issue, and I'm not sure what's actually happened in Washington, when you have these issues, because refiners are larger today, we have inventory in the system, but there's immediate expectation in the wholesale markets that then goes through to the retail markets of how long are they going to be down. Because this is a commodity, we're largely in balance in the system. So when some of the supply comes off, the expectation is going to be tighter, and all of a sudden you get prices moving. And then, if you'll notice, over time, depending on getting it there, the prices come back down.
Well, I think it's one of America's most important commodities and probably least regulated. Hamburger probably has more regulation on it than gasoline. And yet, the fact that this price spike can happen without real supply and demand issues is a problem that we have to address. And I see the chairman has returned, but Mr. Khan, I wanted to mention the fact that you bring up the Jones Act as something of a price increase. Citigroup has been under investigation and paid penalties both for fraud in the mortgage market and is now under investigation by the FSA for manipulation in gas prices. And the fact that you come here and blame the Jones Act as some reason why we have high gas prices is just amazing to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.